Hello, my name is Artak Melkonyan. I work for United Nations Development Program SDG Innovative Finance Team, which has a mission of working with the private sector and making their activities, their business activities, more impact-oriented. We help them to understand what is impact, measure the impact, monitor it, and manage it. We are part of a larger team called Financial Sector Hub, which is looking at the topic of SDG financing, both in public and private sector. However, this presentation will be only about the for-profit organizations, businesses and private sector. To lay ground the topic of sustainability, we need to look at some of the fundamentals in business. Usually in business, we refer to shareholders' interest. Sometimes that is articulated through the concept of shareholders' value maximization. However, because businesses are not working in an isolated environment, they are in a multifaceted, quite complex ecosystems, the concept of shareholders' value and shareholders have been expanded to the concept of stakeholders and stakeholders' interests. Now, stakeholders being everybody, the employees, the neighborhood communities, the government, the markets, literally everybody who are related or connected with the business. Now, the concept of shareholders' value and the stakeholders' value and their overlap are actually laying ground for what we call a sustainability. And sustainability being very important for the business because it provides it with new products, new markets, new technologies, new ways of operating it, and making business much more sustainable, not only from the perspective of environment and social aspect, but also from the perspective of business and the risks around it. So incorporating sustainability in business activities is not a simple matter. There are many terms and many approaches used here. We'll speak about 4 of them. The first one is traditional business, which is not focused on the matters of sustainability, though sometimes those issues are addressed through CSR, corporate social responsibility. The second is responsible business. This is when businesses are excluding certain aspects from their operations based on ethical, environmental and social considerations. The other one is sustainable business, or ESG, when environmental, social and governance standards and the compliance with those standards are considered while building the processes, business processes of businesses. So ideally, all the business processes are compliant with those norms and values. The last one, the most impressive and advanced one, called impact investment. This is when the impact, that means the impact which is produced by the organizations, are defined, targeted, prioritized, measured and managed. These classifications does not have strict boundaries. They are overlapping sometimes. However, each of them has its own set of tools, approaches and methodologies to be applied for the specific scope of the tasks that are to be addressed. Now, usually what is happening, businesses are going through the journey. They are starting from corporate social responsibility, moving to becoming a responsible business, when shifting towards sustainable business, and finally shifting to what we call impact investment, when impact or a generation of benefit becomes an intentional activity. Hence, the impact parameters are defined, targeted, and addressed through specially designed activities. Now, the concept of impact investment becomes more and more popular with investors, especially with millennials. However, it's not simple to implement because of the complexity of impact, complexity of understanding what is impact, and how to measure it, how to manage it, and how to scale it up. The sustainable business approaches have been there for a long time. Empirical evidence, financial performance data, have shown that doing sustainability is quite beneficial to the business. Moreover, some scholars and researchers have proven that the more the business is focused on impact, on ESG principle, the better is the performance. Here on the slide, you can see the graph from Harvard Business School showing that connection. And because of that, we have a growing attention to the concept of impact investment. Moreover, some people even are pointing to the emergence of so-called fourth sector, where along with for-profits, government and non-for-profit, we speak about the fourth sector, where the organizations working under the principles of impact investment or social entrepreneurship are operating. Those are the structures which are targeting the benefit the way the government or non-for-profits would do. However, they earn money, they do the business the way the business sector would do. Many governments develop policies to further deepen the focus of businesses on impact. We try to stimulate the movement of businesses from the value alignment, from compliance, to the impact as a target. So impact as a target is the most important aspect here. It's not enough to say that we comply with this or that norm, for example, gender discrimination. What we need to do, we need to measure. We need to come up with specific parameters. In this particular case of gender, that would be the let's say the proportion of women in our total workforce, the average level of their salaries, access to healthcare or childcare resources, etc. So what we need to do, we need to measure that, we need to parameterize the impact and monitor our progress towards that, and then also manage it to achieve the ultimate benefit generation. Impact is a complex matter. However, that complexity brings to a greater, even greater business benefits. Impact is complex and it has many parameters. Impact reporting investment standards, IRIS, have over 600 different parameters to measure. That is because impact parameters for one field, let's say healthcare, are quite different from impact parameters in the education. Hence, to manage the impact, we need to have much more informative dashboard. We need to look at our businesses through a magnifying glass to reveal interdependencies, connections, and relations between the stakeholders and the impact. That would allow us also to understand better what are the risks surrounding our business. It will also help us to look at our business through much longer term perspective, making our directors and executives making decisions based on long-term considerations. As an example, let's look at the tourism business, which not only needs to be compliant with different social, environmental, and ethical standards, but it also needs to look at, for example, biodiversity. We have seen the cases when resorts were shut down because the coral reef bleached because a small change in the temperature of the water in the ocean, as an example. Hence, the focus on impact measurement in a very advanced way would also result in improving the operations of our business, making it more resilient, more better performing, and more sustainable from the business perspective vis-a-vis its competitors. Impact investment approaches have been there before. Introduction of Sustainable Development Goals back in 2015 as a global vision for sustainability become a true game changer for impact investment as well. So we speak about 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which are manifested through 169 indicators, quantitative and qualitative one, which, however, are interpreted holistically. So Sustainable Development Goals become a global vision for sustainability. So there are two major aspects related to Sustainable Development Goals which are quite unique. This is the first time when we have not only developing countries but also developed countries agreed on the global vision behind the concept of sustainable development. The second aspect is even more important for our discussion. That is, as goal number 17, speaking about the partnerships, which, when we open the brackets, also quite apparently refers to the role of the private sector and businesses in meeting the sustainable development goals. So this all has resulted in having the SDGs as a global interpretation or global benchmark for the businesses to understand their impact as a contribution towards the bigger global vision regarding sustainability. Now, with all of that, that makes our mission vis-à-vis the private sector is focusing on infusing the impact into business decision making, impact in the context of SDGs. Usually the businesses are making their decision based on two major factors. Well, I'm oversimplifying that, but those two factors are revenue and the risks. Now what we try to do, we try to introduce the third aspect, which is impact in the context of SDGs. So we try to infuse SDGs into the business decision making of the companies. SDG context is applicable for all the above discussed sustainability cases. ESG, responsible investment, sustainable investment, and actually UNDP has offerings for all those cases. All the other organizations which are providing advice on sustainability to businesses, they also encompassed SDGs as the major framework to interpret sustainability and make it as a major benchmark to target. However, SDGs have special relevance in case of impact ventures, impact investments, because of their nature of being holistic, interconnected, and universal measure of sustainability from the global perspective. So it gives a chance to any business to understand what is its own specific contribution towards a big, larger global vision, global target. And because of that special significance of SDGs in impact investments, UNDP has special units which are providing expertise and advice to businesses on impact measurement and management. Whereas a special unit, SDG Impact, which provides impact assurance standards, it provides impact intelligence, and also the impact facilitation activities. To further explore relevance of ESGs and SDGs, we need to go and explore the complexity of the impact. We will try to explain some fundamentals in an oversimplified way. As an example, let's imagine we need to plant a tree. Now, first we need to define what is an impact of that tree. Do we speak about the tree leaves which are producing oxygen or creating the shade? Do we speak about the fruits of the trees which people or animals can benefit from? Or do we speak about the roots of the trees which are good for, let's say, strengthening the soil against the landslides? Further, we need to understand what is the breadth of the impacts, which means what is the how wide is the circle of beneficiaries around the trees. So in that particular case, how wide is, let's say, the shaded area, or how many people or animals are benefiting from the fruits of that tree. The other aspect is the depth of the impact, which is how incremental is that in the overall benefits that are provided to the targeted beneficiaries. In this particular case, how important are the fruits from that particular tree in the ration, in the nutrition of people and animals which are defined as the target beneficiaries behind it. But the most interesting aspect of the impact is risk concept in the context of impact. That is the risk that the impact will not happen. To explain that, let's bring a simple case of planting free trees. So what we can do, we can plant free trees in one small landlot. We can plant free trees in 3 different landlots, or we can plant free trees in one large landlot. From the activity perspective, from the output perspective, the activity is the same. Free trees are planted. But from the risks perspective, from the perspective of impact risk, the situation is quite different. And the most interesting aspect here is that the risks are different depending on the type of the impact considered. For example, from the perspective of the, let's say, landslide resilience impact, free, sparsely populated, planted trees are more risky than from the perspective of impact as a fruit produce. This looks as financial portfolio management, but even in a more complex context. So the current approach suggested by industry-wide initiative, Impact Measurement Project, suggests 5 dimensions of impact. First, what impact? Second, who, in terms of beneficiaries, who is the beneficiary of the impact? Third, how much is the impact in terms of the depth, scale, and timeline? Fourth, the contribution, which means additionality of the impact vis-a-vis what would happen in any case. And finally, the risks of the impact. IMP defines 9 types of risks that we will not consider now. But it also defines the intentions, the type of intentions behind the impact, which is important from the portfolio management perspective. We'll come to that a bit later. To explore the major differences between SDG impact and ESGs, we need to use a tool which is called logic model or impact chain. It's a classical tool in the project management, but we will consider its application for impact measurement. Now, that tool has 4 major parts, right? This is input, activity, output, and outcome. In the result chain model, which includes activities, inputs, outputs, outcome, the ESG indicators are usually measuring the effort part. That especially relates to those aspects which are those parameters which are related to social and governance aspects. Some of the environmental indicators do measure the outcome as well. However, in none of those cases, the outcome is considered from the impact perspective in the context of those 5 dimensions that we just described. ESGs are very important, but they are not advanced enough to understand the impact. Impact data are built on ESG data. While ESGs are measuring the level of effort, the impact is actually about the change in the outcome which is produced as a result of those efforts. This is essential in our understanding of impact, especially in the context of SDGs. This is important because only through impact context it is possible to understand what is the contribution of this or that business towards sustainable development goals. The example on this slide refers to a training provided to stakeholders, external stakeholders of a company. Let's suppose farmers who are included in the supply chain of the company. Now, in the simple case, in an oversimplified case, the ESG would refer to the fact of providing the training to the farmers and also probably the number of the farmers who went through the training. From the impact perspective, we would need to consider how important were those skills for the farmers and maybe also for the environment. How additional are those skills in addition to what were already there? And what are the risks related to those new skills obtained through the trainings, because those skills might become obsolete or irrelevant because of this or that event. So impact consideration goes much deeper into the essence of what has been produced by those trainings, rather than just by the fact of those trainings to be delivered to the farmers. We need to consider and understand the impact in the context of SDGs. And we need to do that through looking at the impact by using those 5 dimensions. So we need to consider additionality of the impact. We need to consider the positive aspects of the impact along with mitigating the negative aspects. Only through that we would understand the true contribution of the company into the sustainable development goals. So impact investments go beyond mitigating the negative impact towards generating positive impact. IMP, in fact, suggests three impact intention categories. First, avoid harm. Second, benefit stakeholders. And third, contribute to solution. In the SDG context, that would mean that we are transforming the stakeholders' well-being or stakeholders' value into the context of contribution towards the SDGs. And the contribution is measured through the dimensions of the impact according to certain rules, according to certain context, according to certain parameters that we've discussed. As a summary to this presentation, let us go through different ways of describing the journey from ESGs to SDGs. So first, we can look at that from the perspective of moving from shareholder value to stakeholder value. The second, we can think of moving from compliance to value alignment and then to impact as a target, as an objective in the context of SDGs. And third, we can think of that as a progressing from avoid harm concept towards generating a benefit, towards contributing to a systemic solution relevant to sustainable development goals.